We can talk about spontaneity and planning ahead in webcomics.
Oh gosh, dang it.
Reception problems aside, hello and welcome back to Speech Bubbles, a webcomic podcast where we talk about those webcomics. Hello, my name is Brent, and I'm responsible for the Webcomic Paradise.
My name is Amber, and I'm responsible for the webcomic backlash.
And my name's Jeff. I throw a firearm with a Y.
And it's just been like a really busy week and a half or something, I think, in all of our lives.
Been weird.
I think, yeah, it's just been a lot. A lot has been going on. And so there's a weird energy in the recording space, I think. Because we're all just like, it's rainy and shitty and just like, get me out. Like, I'm waiting for like spring to fucking leave, but also like summer I know is gonna bake me alive, so
Oh no, I'm like, please, summer, please.
I want to skip ahead to like November.
I could probably do without all the summer heat.
Oh my gosh, you babies.
It gets so humid here, Amber.
I'm gonna die. I know I'm gonna die. This is gonna be my first summer here, and it's gonna be swampy, and I'm gonna be like, this isn't summer. Where's my dry heat from the desert?
Nope, you get the air will solidify around you.
Yep. Have fun.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Weather aside, like I said, this week we're talking about spontaneity and planning ahead in webcomics, which is something I think we've definitely touched on here and there on the podcast, because we've definitely touched on like planning certain things and our individual methods of planning. I guess what we mean by this topic is like, I don't know, like going ahead with maybe just like a vague plan and a dream, or like going ahead with a blueprint for every inch of your comic, because I know there are people out there who need to have everything 100% planned out before they even like start their webcomic. Do we want to talk about our personal experiences with it?
Well, I was spontaneous at the start. I think most people are. Whenever you decide you want to do a comic, you're really thinking like, okay, let's just do it. Let's do it.
Yeah, I was thinking this. Like, I think you're a lot less likely to be like wrapped up in plans and specifics at the beginning, and then it gets to that, or at least for me especially, that like a few months in, where like that's when the concrete pillars of the story start like really appearing, I guess.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe not that extreme. Like I said, I rushed into Paradise with like no real plot, actually, just like a dream. But
that's the beauty of webcomics, is you have a very long time to figure it out if you run in without a plan.
I had like maybe
so long to get anywhere.
Maybe 20 pages out, and that means I was like fucking like nearly 2 months into the comic, I guess, or something. I don't remember how quickly I updated originally. But yeah, it is that shit where you're like, do I need to hammer out the exact details of the last chapter when that chapter is not going to be going up for like 5 or 6 years? Like, no, you're going to grow and change as a storyteller in that time. But maybe a little bit of a digression. Yeah, I think most people are like less wrapped up in specificities at the beginning of your webcomic journey.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you go, you realize what sort of planning techniques help you best. And yeah, that's like growing as a creator, not necessarily as a storyteller, but like figuring out what things work for you.
And I think this applies mostly to like your first webcomic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, definitely for like your first project where you haven't really done any of this before. You'd hope that as you continue telling stories in the future, you'd figure it out a little better before you start.
That's the dream.
Like, I did a lot more serious planning, I think, prior to actually uploading stuff. So I didn't like just spontaneously start the comic, but I spontaneously started working on it, and it just grew bigger and bigger. And eventually, I'm like, I now have to plan out everything because this just grew way out of proportion. So I think I'm more on the line of planning ahead
Mm.
in this argument, I guess, in this topic. Where do you guys kind of lie with that, though? Are you a bit more planning or spontaneity?
Spontaneity.
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 I think that I started out very spontaneous with this. I went into it knowing like the backstories of my characters and kind of like what they want, but I didn't know like exactly how everything would go down. And as I've gotten a couple years of this comic under my belt, I think I've kind of moved more towards planning ahead. A little more like I do consistently still to this day change stuff like on the fly while I'm working on a page.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'll plan ahead for important story bits and like plot and outline and character development and stuff, but like as I'm writing the scenes and like working on them actively, I change stuff and I don't know exactly how things are going to get worded or like expressions or whatever. I don't know what all that's going to be until I like post the page.
Mm-hmm.
Like once it's done, like because I change stuff, I'm like, oh, I think I could be a little more subtle with this, or oh, this should be a little more dramatic. Like I kind of just feel my way through it as I'm in the like whatever I'm currently working on, whatever scene. I'm like, okay, well. And I think it's kind of like a marriage between spontaneity and planning ahead because I know what's coming and what's gonna happen, and so I'm able to like spontaneously change things to fit around what I have planned for the future in the current scenes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm getting that. I'm getting that.
Like I just kind of make it up and like change things as I'm like, oh, I could fix that right now, or oh, I should probably drop a little more something here. It's kind of a madman's game.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. What about you, Brent?
My views definitely like I said, I rushed into Paradise kind of with no real idea of an overarching story. Even when I had that overarching story, I didn't write or plan ahead. Like I didn't start doing thumbnails and scripts consistently until I had already been doing Paradise for a year, around chapter 4. And chapter 4 itself was like half thumbnailed, half scripted. Like whatever pages I didn't have thumbnailed out, I had scripted, and whatever pages I didn't have scripted, I had thumbnailed out instead. It was a really weird and inefficient way to work. But then so going into chapter 5, I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this by the book. I'm gonna do scripts, and then thumbnails, and then pages, and so on and so forth. But yeah, for like the first year or so, I didn't have like a plot super hammered away until about 6 months. I mean, I had like a plot there, but it was really nebulous and it changed a whole bunch. I mean, us, even personally, have probably had like a couple of conversations where I've said something along the lines of like, there was a point in Paradise where X was a thing. And what that means, and I was actually just thinking about this the other night, what that means when I say like, there was a draft of the story could mean anything from like, I changed it when the page went up to like, there was like maybe 3 days where I was like, maybe that's where the story is gonna go. There was a lot of shit that was really nebulous in Paradise. Originally there was like many gangs. There was many gangs, and they were all being united under one super gang. And it was gonna be, there was like 7 of them or something ridiculous. Originally there was like a point where like Hawking was the main antagonist, and there was there have been characters who have like been cut or mushed or whatever. But yeah, I mean, as I went on, I learned what I wanted to do and got better at planning, I guess. I've never been great at planning, but
Oh, me neither.
trying to learn how to do it.
That's kind of funny because I always feel like I need some sort of plan before I get into anything, because I just worry about all sorts of things. Like, oh god, but what if I'm not on time? Or what if, I need to really think this thing through before I start doing this thing, and it's just a constant like mess of alarm bells and like worry and stress. So I have to plan for almost everything. Almost. I mean, there's been plenty of things where I've changed on the fly too, right before I got on the page, but maybe not as much as you guys have done. Maybe.
On that note, let's jump into questions. From @MetaSpaceCutie, have you ever had a situation in which you think of a brand new idea for the story that could potentially affect the planning of your comic?
Yes!
Yeah, dude. I was gonna say we've definitely talked about this on the podcast before. It's like you end up like doing a word problem. You're like, okay, if this character is gonna be introduced here instead of here, or this is a brand new character who's gonna be suddenly introduced, how are they gonna fit into the rest of the story? And you do this like Mad Libs shit with your own comic where you're like, if this goes here, then this has to go here. Blank is here. What about like really big stuff? Have you guys ever had like a huge plot revelation that you're like, oh man, that's very good, but I have to move so many things out of the way in order to make way for that?
Oh yeah. Plenty of times. Remember when I was restructuring my story? Yeah, that happened a lot.
That's true.
Oh man. Yeah, definitely. I'd have to say definitely. Obviously, I can't say, but it's happened more than once.
Yeah, this kind of sucks because I'm like, yeah, I have really big examples of like that, but I can't actually say it. I can't say it because they haven't happened yet. I can't say it because, but yeah, I have definitely done a lot of reorganizing and like reevaluating like character roles and like, oh gosh.
Great.
I feel like I'm being called out right now.
I mean, I'm still, this next chapter coming up, I've been adding stuff to it for like the past couple of weeks. Like every couple of days I think of like another like thing I could slip into a scene or something, and it's just like, it's gonna be a really beefy chapter by the time I'm done. I'm like hoping to keep it in the same range as like the other like chapters 4 through 6, like in about 50 pages, but like I'm a little worried it might hit like 60 or 70 just because of like the amount of things I want to have in it. Nobody's fault but my own, but it is that like, I don't know, like a game of Jenga. You're rearranging these like blocks of like story ideas.
How many can I move around
without the
before
thing
it falls
toppling
over?
Exactly.
Have you guys have you ever like had to maybe shoot down a new idea like that because it's like, oh, this would just break everything. I can't roll with this.
Yeah.
Or have you always tried committing to it?
I try committing to it if I can make it work. I can't remember if I've said so on the podcast or just to you guys personally, but the next chapter has a character who's new in it, like relatively new. It's a character role that has always needed filling, but when I was like, I want this character's role to be expanded in the story, so I was trying to figure out whether or not to make it like a one-off joke design or like a callback to an old design like old friends would get or whatever. And I have like a Nova power that I've been sitting on for a bit that I wanted to use in the story because it would let me do something later on, but I couldn't find a good way to organically put it in the story. And then now I did. So like over the past couple of weeks, what I've been doing is, okay, I get this power in the story attributed to this new character who's going to be in the next chapter. Now that new character's role has to be expanded in the story, which means I have to add scenes with this character with other characters in the story in order for them to organically fit into the place where I want to use their power eventually. And all that is tied to the fact that this character was just like, I just made this character for like I said, this was a role in the chapter that always needed filling, but now I've expanded that character's, I guess, like web of social links to other characters and other points in the story, and it's just been like mentally kind of like jumping through hoops for the past couple of weeks in like a fun way. It's like it's like figuring out how this character fits in the rest of the story and how I can use this character for the rest of the story is like fun and interesting, but like if you zoom out far enough, you're like, how much does this add to the narrative? But it's like, it's a thing I really want to do, so it's a thing I'm trying really hard to figure out.
Okay.
That's a lot of, like, vagueness, probably, because I don't want to talk about spoilers for my own comic. But,
Right.
it's, like, the best example I have. Because this character very much could have been, like, a one-off character who we never saw again. But I feel like maybe too many of those in the beginning chunk, which I think is natural if one bases your structure on like a 20-episode anime as much as I do.
Right.
But I really like the idea of this character's relationships with other certain characters that, again, I can't talk about. But yeah, that's like a lot of words to describe that. Like, yes, I usually, if it's a thing that's cool enough and a thing I like enough, I try really hard to find a way to make it work.
Okay.
I've had other stories, not so much Paradise, but other stories where I've had like whole changes that I committed to and dropped out. You guys know about my like side project currently and how originally it was like a totally different genre than the one it's working on now. And by changing it to like a horror story, I cut out like, I don't know, like 60% of the stuff I had for it so far. Despite the fact that I really liked a lot of the stuff I was doing, it didn't fit with the direction I wanted the story to be. I have that a lot more with side projects than Paradise, when it's like, you know, I don't know when I'm going to tell this story. So, like, massive changes can go underway, and I'm allowed to, like, maybe spend a few months working on it in this direction and see if that works.
I guess that's what is an important thing to think about, is it going to help the story overall, and is it important? Like, should you be putting all this time into this brand new thing, putting into your story that you just pin perfectly kind of fit together, this weird jigsaw puzzle, and then you got this new piece. So it's like, is this piece really going to help this entire puzzle overall, or is it just me trying to force this piece in a slot that doesn't work?
That's true. We've talked about like killing your darlings before. Is it you trying to shove in something you just really like? And you know what? Sometimes I don't think there's something wrong with that if you can make it work, I guess. Because that's like half of what my comic like changes are. Is like, oh man, I just want to do a cool thing. How do I rearrange this so that it can work?
Rule of cool, you'll make it work if it's cool enough.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I guess I should read the next one. Sorry, I was like, who read this? Okay, anyway. Okay, so next question from @Mordsec. I find that too many plans make me lose motivation, but spontaneity leaves me at a loss when I've written myself into a corner. How do you guys balance both?
This was something I felt really, really hard when I was starting out, actually. I was like, planning makes me feel like I'm suffocating, which is why it's why I jumped into Paradise the way I did without any planning, because I was like, you know what, this is never gonna get done if I don't just go through with it.
I definitely am the same way still to this day. I hate like knowing every single thing about my comic and my world, and I know that some people need to do that with their characters and with their world building. Like, they need to know every little detail because that like helps them creatively and like write their narrative. But like, I don't like knowing everything. I like being able to surprise myself and keep myself entertained. Because you know how you'll have ideas and like you'll know like way down in the future this fight scene's gonna happen, or like this like confrontation is gonna come to a head and it's gonna be really cool, but like you've known about it happening for so long that it's like kind of lost its like pizzazz for you.
Yeah.
You know, because you've known about it, so you're not as hype about it. But so like, I like to just keep things kind of more. Like, I find things to get excited about by, like, kind of leaving it open for me to be like, oh, this is a good joke I just thought of. I can't wait to share it next week. Or, like, you know, like, it keeps me entertained as I'm writing.
I jumped into, I don't know. See, like, it's kind of unfair because my first attempt at a webcomic was my original Backlash run from 2012. And I jumped into that without knowing anything.
very much. I like didn't know what the conflict was gonna be. I just kind of had a vague premise of like it was basically like Teen Titans a little bit, and then I had like a strike of inspiration about like what the antagonist should be, and then that kind of just fit everything else into place. And so like I went into my second run of Backlash, this current one, the canon one, I guess, knowing a lot about like what, like who is what and who's doing what and who caused what for whose tragic backstory and like all that. And so all that information isn't like as like exciting for me because I've known it for years and years and years. And so I just kind of leave things open-ended on purpose for myself while I'm writing. I'm like, future me will figure that out and she'll get really excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
Which might be bad.
I don't know, I actually do that sometimes with like, I do that especially with characters. Like a lot of times if I've said so many times, Paradise has so many characters. There's a lot of characters who show up like, you know, later in the latter half of the story, and those I don't try and like worry about getting a super hammered design for. I just have like, you know, maybe like once every 6 months I draw them again because my art style has changed or whatever, and I try and see how they fit in the new style, or I replace them with a character who fits their role, a new character. And in that way, because like one of my favorite parts of creating is making characters, is making fun characters. So in keeping that fun for myself, I don't worry about getting the characters designed down super pat unless they're going to be showing up in like the next chapter, like within 6 months or something. So in that way, even though I have characters who I know about, I know what their role in the story is, I know how their fights go and all that good stuff, like I still get when I get to designing them, it's like I have a new character.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fun for me.
With like I feel like it's like a balance of over planning and spontaneity. Like you don't want to over plan, but you also don't want to be so spontaneous that you don't know where you're going. So like if you have like a basic, I think it's easier to not write yourself into a corner by being spontaneous if you do know where your comic is headed. Like at least in like a vague general sense, like if you know like what does your main character want, who is their like antagonist, what's like the conflict, that will help you just be able to like go from instance to instance easier, because you're like, all right, so they just have to go from this point that I wrote myself into to this next point. Like how, and then leave like how that happens up to yourself, like in the moment. That's kind of what I do.
we all know the boy who lives underground's gotta go fight the Beast King. What he does on that adventure with his brother and his friends is entirely up to each episode. Totally referencing an anime there. At all. Alright. Well, from at Alice's BrainPad, webcomics are a weird new thing. It's like writing your first draft in public as it turns into your second, then your third, as you improve. That's so true, except, you know, it's like the 10th for me. But, I mean, isn't that natural? Even if you manage to write a full script, it's going to take years for A to reach Z. So ideas change, and you change. 19-year-old just starting a webcomic you is not going to be the same as 37-year-old I'm on the last chapter so I can now die you.
Insinuating that you die at age 37.
This is something I think about a whole lot, actually. In regards to like changing some things, because there's part of you that's like, you know, I could always just do better on the next story in regards to whatever, like, but there's another part of you that's like, I'm gonna be telling this story for like another like 6 to 8 years probably. Like, that's a lot of time to be able to change around things.
Yeah. It's like something you can do in the background and no one will have to really know.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you make it obvious and bad writing, or maybe when you first start out, you weren't really sure where the story's going, and then you had to change a lot, and then maybe things don't quite add up the same way. I'm not speaking from personal experience or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I do think that this also is more evident with your first project,
Yeah.
your first webcomic, because it's a new first experience, and you're going to learn a lot in the first couple years, and you're going to learn a lot about yourself and your work ethic, and if it's for you or not. And hopefully, if you make it to the end, you tie a bow on it and say it's done. Baby's first webcomic completed.
I did one whole thing.
I did one. Oh, I hate webcomics. Forgetting, jeez. But you get done with it, and then hopefully by the end you've done so much. Like, you've done a lot of growing yourself, and you've probably had a lot of new ideas. So then you can probably just jump right into the next one and know where you're going and be able to tell it even more effectively and efficiently, because you spent a long time learning by doing, and learning by watching other people, and
because also chances are this is probably also your first attempt at doing a comic at all for longer than a little amount of time, doing a comic a page or two a week for years and years is gonna change and affect how you draw comics, and you'll be able to take the knowledge you learn into other projects, but that first one that you do for years and years is gonna be this it especially, no comic that goes on for years and years looks exactly the same in the beginning as it does in the end. That's really evident in a lot of manga. Like any long-running shonen manga, you can look at art of the main character from the beginning and art of the main character 5 years in, and it is different. And that's just going to happen because you're going to find better ways to use the visual language, and your style's going to change, because that's 5 years of new things that you'll be taking in, and 5 years of art that you'll be ahead in practice. So things are just going to change. But that first comic especially is going to be this weird living timeline of you figuring out how to draw comics.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
It's a time capsule.
Yeah.
And if it really bugs you, I guess you can go back and redraw it for the print version. If you really want to.
Pages.
But yeah, this oh man, writing it as your first draft in public, as it turns into, it really is my first chapter definitely feels like my first draft of Paradise, and then they keep building on each other, I guess. In a whole bunch of different ways. Originally when I started out, I was all my chapters are going to be 20 pages long, because that's how long print comics are, and that'll keep me on a good schedule. And then I just had too many things I wanted to put in each chapter, and now they're about 50 pages long a chapter. I've landed on about 50 pages for the last 3 chapters, almost exactly. So now I want to stay there, and 50 pages is a lot of pages. I don't know, man.
I know. I know.
You'll get there, Jeff.
You don't have to tell me.
But you do carry those lessons about consistency and storytelling onto your next comic projects. Even the ones I'm planning right now or working on right now are different in the way that I approach them, but only because I learned how I do comics from Paradise.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's why that first comic's always important, and why people say you should make it real short, so that you can apply what you learn.
People say you should make it real short, but it's impossible because you want to do your passion project, and if that's what you got to do to get you to make comics, then do it.
Yeah, the smart objective answer is tackle the one that's going to take you less than a year as your first long form comic project. But I think the one that's going to maybe teach you more about how you work as a person is the one that's going to take you 10-15 years. Try that one first and see where that goes. Or even just like 5 years. Like 5 years is a long time to be working on something.
Yeah.
And arguably among the like lower range of time it takes a webcomic to be complete. Like I said, I'm gonna be lucky if it only takes me maybe 5 more years to finish Paradise, but it's probably gonna be closer to like 8.
Yeah.
I actually don't know how long it's gonna take me to finish.
I'd stop trying to think about it because it makes me like.
Yeah, I don't think in terms of years because I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to be doing in a few years. I'm just going to take this
That's
a page
true.
at a time.
Because it's a lot of time.
Tell as many stories in the background as I can as I'm getting this big monster out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this. The one thing I do take in comfort is I know it won't take me as long to finish as like some manga comics that are out there, like Berserk or something. You know, I know I'm not going to spend that much time on it, so that helps a little, but just a little.
Jeff, we actually talked about this yesterday, but we also don't have editors going, I know you just got to the main villain of the story, but maybe keep the story going because we want to keep making money off of your story.
Yeah, that's another thing. We don't have to extend any of this. I will say, however, though, if someone was paying me money to work on on Firearm, and I like just to extend it, gosh, I would do it. Just because I have so many ideas that I had to like cut out, and just to shorten this freaking story, I'd do it.
See, now I would just like merge the spin-off I have planned for Paradise right back into the main story, probably.
Exactly. Moving on. Hey, Brett, how about you read that next thought there?
All right. A thought on spontaneity and planning ahead in webcomics from @DemonDiceKaren. Being on time is important to showing your audience that you can be consistent with sharing your content, but you can't write comics when you're dead. Life gets so busy and hectic, but if it's something like, I think I'll skip this update because I feel like sleeping through today and watching Netflix, you can't expect people to not lose interest when they see you can't stick to the schedule you made for yourself. Sometimes personal deadlines are important. They take self-discipline, but it's rewarding to not only your readers, but yourself when you meet the goal you assigned yourself time-wise. This was something I actually did do when I was starting out. Like, I realized maybe in August 2014 that I wanted to do a webcomic, right? And by about, like, October, November, I had the concept down. So it was at that point that I was like, okay, over Christmas break, I'm going to just do pages. And then January 2015 is going to be, like, launch date. And I'm going to put the comic out January 2015, whether I'm, like, ready or not, basically. And it was, like, keeping to that had me, like, working on a whole bunch of pages over my Christmas break then.
Like, you actually, like, stuck with it?
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
January 5th, 2015, I believe.
Oh.
See, when I was first uploading Backlash, like, the current run of Backlash Chapter 1, I, like, did not have update schedule. It was just whenever I get it finished because I had other stuff I was doing. I was taking classes and I was in charge of I had other responsibilities. So it was just I just updated whenever I could.
I think I remember that.
Yeah, and I just uploaded it to like DeviantArt. And yeah, so it's just, and then like it definitely like as I got more consistent and decided, okay, I'm gonna like I have to do updates. I definitely did get more consistent like readership and people like being interested because I did, and then it also felt really good to prove that I could like consistently update my comic for like years and years on those days. The downside is that I did forget how to recognize when like my health is more important than an update. Like, I'm like, I really can't focus on this page. Okay, but you have to do it anyway. Like, you can't take a mental day. You can't take like a break day. I've gotten better at that since, but that was a process too. Like, I got into the process of like being consistent and not just updating spontaneously and whenever. I got better at like planning things, but I forgot how to regulate myself, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's been like a process, and finally I think I found like the balance.
Yeah, no, I kind of dealt with that a lot too. Like, forgetting to eat every now and then, or I'd stay up late just working, not really getting a lot of sleep, just trying to get the updates done. And I worried about that a lot, about being consistent, because I knew having a consistent update schedule and planning for that was going to help me in the long run, especially for just gaining a readership. And that's why I worked on my prologue. Like, I finished it, made sure it was all done, and started work on like the next chapter before I started uploading it. That's how far ahead I planned. And as a result, that's also how I became a little complacent. A little bit. And as a result, there was times when like there was had to be like mini hiatuses, or I'm like, I can't do this. I gotta take a break, you guys. And I feel like I've taken more hiatuses for just breaks in general since chapter one started. Like, just this entire past year has just been nothing but breaks. Just for short bursts of time. And I do think that's kind of affected how people read Firearm, at least. Even though I happen to have a lot of ringers, it seems.
Well, I mean, you had a lot of like bumps in the road too, though.
Yeah.
You had a lot of like hiccups and like stuff that you couldn't really plan for.
It's stuff that would put like anybody on the bench for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
And also, it's been like a fucking like a hectic 11 months, maybe, or so. Not just like an increasingly so in the world, I guess. I don't know. There's like a generalized stress and anxiety I think everybody is feeling. And yeah, I think the past year or so has been really like kind of goofy for like a lot of people. Yeah.
You do what you can.
You do what you can without fucking going crazy.
We do what we must because we can.
And because nobody else is going to do the comic.
That's true.
I'm not going to tell Firearm. Amber's not going to tell Firearm. Jeff, you're the only one who can tell Firearm.
You're the only one that can do it.
Unless you write down extremely detailed instructions in your will for your protege to find.
Because your protege doesn't have comics they want to tell, of course.
This will be their practice comic.
Well, I mean, I will say this. I do have a lot of detailed notes already written down.
Oh gosh, I don't. I fear for my protege who has to carry on my legacy because they'll have to decipher some bullshit.
Is this the Paradise sequel that's going to come out like 15 years from now, where it's like all of their kids and stuff?
No. I'm never going to do an all of their kids Boruto Paradise. The Paradise spin-off is just another, it's instead of cops with superpowers, it's spies with superpowers. That's as much as I'm going to say about it. Because the main characters...
I'm not just going to get like a little Pam and Yvonne clones running around.
No, although they'll probably have cameos in it. I can't...
Oh, good.
I can't even like really talk about it in depth because like any of the... most of the characters who would be major characters in Agents of Paradise, some of them haven't even fucking shown up yet in my comic. So...
But you have planned ahead that this is a thing that's going to happen.
It's a thing I would like to do eventually, yes. It's like the fucking like exploding brain meme, how like the last one is like spin-offs for a comic you haven't even finished yet featuring characters that haven't shown up in the main comic. How many levels of self-involved projects are you on? You're like a little baby, watch this.
Well, at least we can say, to bring this full circle, that you learned from your spontaneity and planned ahead for this spin-off.
Oh, gosh.
So there we go.
There you go.
Some planning ahead is definitely like catered to by the fact that you're not going to be able to do the comic for years and years and years, so that's a lot of time to plan.
True. True.
Because you can't just do 8 webcomics and at once. You'll die.
I was gonna say watch me, but I'm like, nah.
No, you'll
Watch
die.
This.
Watch this, and then you die.
Okay, well maybe 7 is possible. because
Nope,
then
that
you update
immediately
one
cut to a
them
shot of your
every-
tombstone. It's like, oh yeah, watch this. Dung.
Your
Tried
life,
to do-
Amber.
Trying to
You
do
tried
7
so
webcomics.
hard.
Tried to
without
warn her.
finishing any of them first.
And the best part, John Twitter stands over your
God.
Oh my gosh, he's gonna beat me up.
From
I'm
beyond the
already dead.
grave.
I'm already dead, John Twitter.
Here lies Amber. She's now on indefinite hiatus.
Oh no! Yeah. Oh.
That's bad.
On my actual tombstone.
I'm gonna need a minute. Whew. All right. Is there anything else you want to add?
You gotta find what works for you.
Gotta find what works for you. That's really the message of this podcast. Is
This
like,
whole podcast is just figure it out.
find what works for you and like be nice as you can to people. Have some common sense.
Also, save your work and eat.
God, yeah, save your work. I just did like a huge backup the other day.
Oh, good.
Because I realized I have fucking like 10 side projects now that all have like a substantial amount of like drawings / work done on them that I would be really upset if I lost. So like I did like a bigger backup of like all my files. That was like most of my fucking Sunday morning, but
But it's done.
it's done.
It's saved. You're all good. So hey, Brent.
Mm-hmm.
Buddy pal. I believe you have the webcomic recommendation of the week.
I do
Do
have
you
the
not?
webcomic recommendation of the week, and I definitely didn't forget it was my turn to recommend a webcomic until 10 minutes into this podcast and frantically Google one.
Oh, that sounds preposterous.
No, yeah, I'm really good at planning. That's what we've been talking about this whole time.
Right?
So I'm going to recommend a webcomic that is really obvious in your webcomic circles, and it's one of those webcomics where we've talked about it and we've been like, oh, we can't recommend this one because like it's one everyone really knows about, but I'm going to recommend it anyway. It's called Paranatural by Zack
I knew
Morrison.
I knew it was gonna be Paranatural.
This is one of those webcomics where it's like, if you read webcomics, you probably know Paranatural. Paranatural was recommended to me when I first started reading webcomics by people who don't even read that many webcomics. But if by some stroke of unfortunate circumstance, there we go, that's a whole sentence. If by some stroke of unfortunate circumstance you have not read Paranatural by Zack Morrison, a Hiveworks joint yet, here's what it is. Paranatural is a comedy action comic about a group of superpowered middle schoolers fighting evil spirits and investigating paranormal activity in their hometown. And that's it. It's got about 5-6 chapters?
But they're all so long.
Yeah, the first ones are like a little shorter, and then it's on its 5th chapter, and like chapters like 4 and 5 are both over 100 pages long.
They're very long.
It's just like I said, it's a really good comic. The colors are really, really good. The writing is really funny. Like, it had some of like the funniest like character interactions and dynamics I've read in any webcomic, probably. Like some of the conversations these characters have are like really, really just very funny. And aside from that, Zack Morrison also really uses the medium of comics really smartly in ways. Like, a character will shout a really dramatic speech bubble, and that speech bubble will like knock another character over, or a character will get hit with a dodgeball and all the letters will fall off their shirt. He uses like the physical constraints of comics in a really interesting way.
It's also we talked about earlier in the podcast about like your webcomic being a timeline. This Paranatural has been going for so long. It's a really interesting and like inspirational comic to read for if you've never done a webcomic before, because like his art gets a lot better as you go through it, like
if you
exponentially so.
Paranatural's been going for I think 6 years, and if you want like a really good example of art evolution and what doing a comic consistently for 6 years can do for your art, read Paranatural. It's a really good example of that. Like I said, like if you read webcomics a lot, you've probably at least heard of Paranatural. If you're listening to a podcast that's about something as niche as webcomics, you probably read Paranatural. But Paranatural is consistently like one of my, like, the updates are so jam-packed with shit and content. It's Zack packs a lot of panels and information into every page to make that like once or twice a week update like really feel like it's worth it. Like you're getting a lot of information every week.
Every time it updates, I'm like, I have to put aside at least 5 minutes to read this page because it's going to take me at least 5 minutes to read it.
To get all the little like details and jokes and stuff that he's put in each page. And it's just, it's very good. And if you haven't read it yet, I'd highly suggest that you do.
Okay. That means me. I'll finally go read it. Gosh.
Yeah, I think that's gonna do it for us this week. A little bit of a short one, but I think we're due for one of those every now and then. They can't all be, hour and a half conversations about antagonists and such. But we should I want to do a part 2 to the villain episode. But besides the fact, we should actually have some episodes with guests coming up, hopefully. And you'll be notified that if you're following the Speech Bubbles Twitter, which I believe is at SB Comic Podcast.
Yes, that's correct.
Man, like I feel like maybe we should be saying that more often, but like I don't. It's fine. Follow us on Twitter at SB Comic Podcast for updates and the fucking episode subjects where you'll be able to ask questions about the topic of the week or the guest of that week.
Oh.
I feel like maybe we should say that like more than once every 14 episodes, but it's a work in progress.
You're figuring it out.
We don't just do this for free. We do it for fun.
All right.
I have just been Brent.
Until next time, I've been Brent.
I've been Amber.
And I've been Jeff.
And we do this for free.
And for fun.
No, end it, please. No, get me out of here.